in this moment of BLM, I am hearing now a different level of engagement.
Right.
Because people have been doing work in communities for very long. It's not sexy. It doesn't sell magazines or newspapers. So people will not go into a community and say, oh, you've been doing restorative circle, you've been working, you've been doing healing circles. People have been doing that work, yes, imperfectly. They've been doing it so that when we have this tipping point now, and I believe it's a tipping point, like I read a statement from Duke University's president where he laid out in very explicit ways how they are going to have anti-racism on a kind of systemic structural level. I can send it to you if you're interested.
Yes.
It's probably online. It's a beautiful statement. My hope is that that community holds him accountable, because people are tired of virtue signaling. They are tired of empty promises. They are tired of people just saying, say his name, say her name. No, it's not just enough to say Eric Garner's name or Breonna Taylor's name. It's not enough to say their name. We also have to shake up this system so that we no longer have to be saying people's names and making hashtags out of their deaths.
I want to just go back to something you mentioned earlier, because you talk about whites need to be involved in this. And even before that, you were talking about truth and reconciliation. And I remember reading Bishop Tutu book on that and his work in South Africa and the healing that took place with the perpetrators as well as the victims. So that's right on. At the same time, I also read where he said that in Africa, and I think the word was Ubuntu, which means Africans see within one another their shared humanity. And that made me wonder, since I don't think the US is founded on such a relational framework, how successful would we be here with truth and reconciliation?
I believe that there are myriad tools, myriad interventions, myriad entry points for this healing work. So when folks say, we need this one thing and this one thing only, I believe that forecloses human ingenuity and creativity. So and that's also a form of colonial thinking and colonial action, when you just want one way of doing something, even if it feels good and it sounds radically minded. It's still colonizing. So I think, yes, have the Reparations Commission, have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, have healing circles in schools, have as many tools and entry points as possible. We need white people working with other white people. We need inter-cross-racial groups working together. We need Asians having their own groups, Indigenous having their own groups, Black folks, and all of that must be happening simultaneously, because there are just some conversations that sometimes I need to have with other Black folk. There's some conversations that African Americans need to have only with other African Americans, right? And then there's a space and time for the Black African diaspora community to come together. There are times for Blacks and whites to have conversation. There are times for Indigenous, Asians, Latinos, whites to come together. And so I think all of those must be happening simultaneously. So I am all like, okay, yes, let us have all of that, all of the above, right? I want to go back to your previous book. I don't think I answered it fully when you said, could here in the United States, because we don't have an Ubuntu relationality, there are certainly sub-communities in the United States that follow things that are very similar to that. And there's been a long heritage of that. So it's not as if we don't have it, because the American collective is not monolithic.
That's true. That's very true. Yes.
Right? And so we have lots of communities in the United States for a long time that do not work in colonialist ways, that act in ways that represent the spirit of Ubuntu. So it is here. We just need to tap into them, shine a spotlight and say, you've been doing this. Teach us how to scale this up.
Well, give us some examples of that.
Right. So I think of let's go back to Audre Lorde, right? My birthday was June 5th, and I raised about almost $4,000 online from friends, their generosity, $4,000 for the Audre Lorde project in New York. Are you familiar with that organization?
No.
Okay. So check them out if you get some time. Audre
I'm
Lorde
going to
project.
write it down.
Yes. Audre Lorde, lesbian, of Caribbean descent, ardent feminist, and poet, activist. She worked intersectionally, because she was like, I'm not just a woman, I'm also a Black woman, I'm also a queer woman. And that's how I work as well too. I'm not just a man, I'm a Black man, I'm a Black queer man, I'm a Black queer immigrant man, right? And so I try to bring all those things to the table. But Audre Lorde, she challenged those communities, because the queer community in New York City was also very racialized, and not that it's fixed, but there's lots of racism in the queer community. So she challenged white supremacy in the queer community, right? She challenged some of the homophobia in the Black community, to say, yes, I'm a Black woman, but I'm also a queer Black woman. She challenged white feminism, right? For it to be more inclusive. And so the work of Audre Lorde, I raise that up as an example of intersectional work that has long been happening in this country. And she built community. And of course, now there is this organization named after her. And so they provide resources for LGBTQ youth in New York City. And not just that, but it's also they work on conscientizing those youth, raising their political awareness, right, at the intersection of their queerness. And so it was my privilege for my birthday to raise, it's a pittance, $4,000, but it will go a long way in helping, because we know that homelessness among queer youth is very high among Black communities, among the highest. And we know, Black trans persons, they have the highest rates of murder per capita in the United States, right? In terms of that population. So I was very glad to donate to that cause. But that's just one example of those communities that have been working intersectionally for so long. So, when my students hear the term intersectionality in the classroom, they think, oh, what is this new term? And I'm like, no, I'm just simply plugging you into a long history of people working intersectionally here in the United States and around the world. It might be new to your ears, new to your heart, but it's been happening a long time. And Janet, that's an important point in my work as well too. I'm often trying to historicize whatever work I am doing. I don't want people thinking that Hakim Williams is doing something new, because then that becomes an egocentric work. I'm like, no. I am simply sharing with you what the ancestors have long been doing, right? And what that does for us as well too is that it's two things. It connects students to a history, because I think sometimes students feel ahistorical, so they're connected to a long history. And two, it takes our political problems out of the vacuum that it sometimes exists in. And when I say exist, it exists discursively. It doesn't exist materially in a vacuum, because we know that these issues, they have long lineages. So when a student, we're talking about, they're looking at BLM, and some students say they're worried by looting and the rioting and burning property, I'm able to have a wider conversation to them, and we bring in the American Revolution and other revolutions where folks burn shit to the ground to send a message. I'm like, folks looting and burning and lighting up stuff, that's not within a vacuum. There are many historical examples of folks doing that. And I talk about the Haitian Revolution, I talk about the French Revolution, American Revolution. that people lighting things on fire, that's not new. And no matter where you stand on the spectrum of that, that it's important to historicize that, right? We talk about people living in very disenfranchised communities, people living in food deserts, so that when you see riots erupting, it is almost like releasing a valve that there has been pressure building in these communities. They have been ignored for so long. And students, they're grateful when their eyes are opened to that historicization, right? And so that's why the work I'm doing, I talk about systemic restorative practice, which is a model that I use in my work. I'm like, there's 3 R's. Reflect on your past, dig up your trauma. Second, when you dig it up, it's going to cause you pain, because then you're suddenly remembering what has been done to your peoples, and that's in your DNA. You have to repair yourself, repair your community. And then the third, when you've done those 2, then you start critically re-envisioning how we interact with each other and the earth. That's an important piece. It's not just about humans, it's about animals, plants, the earth.
I really want to and hope to interview you and talk with you when I do this road trip. Do you see my map?
Yes.
I haven't left Tampa yet, but I would have been back by now, you know?
Yeah.
But as soon as there is a vaccine for COVID, I'm hitting the road to do this documentary. So I do hope to meet with you then and get another opportunity. It's been a joy talking with you.
Thank you.